Good evening, everybody. My name is Peter Little. I'm the chair of the Leicestershire Fieldworkers, which is the group hosting the talk this evening. We would normally be meeting in the University of Leicester, but with the COVID situation, we are retreated to online, but that of course gives us the benefit of welcoming people from all over the world, apparently. So welcome to you all. Tonight's meeting, we're very pleased to have with us Professor Simon Jones of the University of Leicester, who's spoken to our group before, and we know we will get a really good talk from him. Tonight he is talking about archaeology in the colonial maritime landscape, Roman and Byzantine Akrotiri, Cyprus. So I'm not going to go on for any longer, and I'll now hand over to Simon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pete, and thank you very much to the group for inviting me, and very interested to see what a global audience we've got. Anyway, so this lecture is going to be, oops, I've got to learn how to do this. It's the first time I've ever done one of these. Let me just, I'll just accidentally turn my video off and I'll turn it back on again. There we go, I hit the wrong button. This presentation is going to be about a project in Cyprus, which is very much a University of Leicester led project, but it's also a collaboration. And at least those of you who are in the fieldwork group, there will be a number of faces here I'm sure you'll recognise as well, because this is also, I like to think of this as ULAS on sea, which University of Leicester Archaeological Services on sea in the Mediterranean, where they don't normally get to go except on holiday. It's worth just orientating ourselves here as to where Cyprus lies, right at the eastern end of the Mediterranean, sandwiched in between Greece and Turkey and Syria, Israel, Palestine and Egypt. This, of course, will be particularly relevant as we go on to talk about the connections of the port, which we're actually going to be looking at here today. So also to help explain the title about talking about a sort of colonial landscape, Cyprus was a British colony in the first half of the 20th century, and the British Empire, of course, was gradually dissolved after World War II, and this in Cyprus was accompanied tragically by a lot of anti-British and intercommunal violence, which led to, let me stop hitting the wrong button here, the situation which we're going to be describing here this evening. So, excuse me, Cyprus gained independence in 1960, mostly, except for these red bits here, which were the two British sovereign bases, which were retained for as long as the UK felt it needed them for military purposes. And this was a situation which prevailed, or still prevails today. And then, as many of you may remember, in 1974, as a result of continued political conflicts within Cyprus, there was then the Turkish invasion, which led to the partition of Cyprus. This is the situation which we have today, with the Turkish occupied north and the primarily Greek-speaking republic in the south, but also still these two British bases, which I think of as sort of some of the last fragments of the British Empire. And of course also, so there's this British presence, and there is also the additional part of the mix now, which is a large Russian expatriate community. So that nice Mr. Putin also is on the scene here. So I should explain that I previously was doing a project in Syria, and I thought that that was probably about as politically complicated as you could get for being involved in an overseas field project. Cyprus actually is even more complex, but nonetheless a fascinating, very rewarding place to work in. So we're going to focus on the Western Sovereign Base area, which, as you can see, is right next to the major Cypriot port of Limassol. And this is the yellow line here. I think everybody can see my cursor, is the boundary of the sovereign base area. It's not fenced in any sense, it's just open. This is just the land boundary. And within this, the Western Sovereign Base area is Episcopi Garrison, British Army here. And then on Akrotiri Peninsula itself is RAF Akrotiri, which is where we're working. Geomorphologically speaking, this is a little fragment of Cyprus, which was an island until later prehistory. One of the things our project has helped establish is the chronology of the rejoining of this island to Cyprus by these huge tombolo beaches on either side here, which frame the famous Salt Lake, which is today at least sometimes frequented by the famous flamingos. So that's the setting. Where we're actually working down here is RAF Akrotiri. And RAF Akrotiri is the Royal Air Force's most active, busiest operational airbase. It was well known as being a base for strikes against Daesh or ISIS in recent years. So it's a base which is used for military operations in that sense. But in fact, actually, most of the activities which fly in and out of the Royal Air Force base here are not fighters and bombers. It's much more aircraft like this. Military airliners, Voyagers, which are actually grey painted Airbuses. And very comfortable they are too. I've been lucky enough to fly one of these. They're very, very spacious because, of course, soldiers are rather big and need lots of space. One of the main things about RAF Akrotiri, one of its purposes, is to be a communications centre for movements of goods and people, also information as well. There's all sorts of electronics there as well. But this aircraft really kind of symbolises the particular function of RAF Akrotiri, which is kind of relevant to what we're going to be looking at in terms of the archaeology as well. So people have kind of asked me, what are you doing in Colonial Akrotiri? Because Akrotiri, as I say, is still effectively a British colony. It's not called that anymore, but that's de facto what it is. At a time when in the UK, particularly in the university sector, we are talking a lot about being in a post-colonial era, and not least about decolonisation of the curriculum and so on. So it seems a bit of an anomaly. But anyway, I'll explain what we're doing and how we're trying to address the issue of this anomalous situation of working in a British enclave within Cyprus. So here's a bit of a close-up of Akrotiri Peninsula. And the yellow line here is the edge of the airbase. This is all British controlled territory, but this is the security perimeter of the airbase. And the important thing to note here is Akrotiri village. This is a Greek Cypriot village here, substantial community. Many of them work in the airbase, but they're outside the wire. Where we're particularly focused is going to be in this area down here at Dreamers Bay. That's what we're going to be looking at in some detail. But it's worth just saying one or two things about the airbase. Created in the 1950s, when the British realised they were going to be giving up most of Cyprus to independence, they created this new airbase and fenced off the peninsula like this. One of the conditions of the agreement with the Cypriot government was that there should be no development here apart from military development, no commercial development or anything like that, which has been stuck to scrupulously by the British authorities, which has actually had some interesting consequences, because any of you who've been to Cyprus may know that most of the south coast of Cyprus is more or less continuous concrete in terms of coastal developments, hotels, beaches, and so on. This area has become an accidental reserve, both for nature and also for archaeology, outside the area of the actual airbase itself and the military town. All these zones here pretty much as they were when the British took this area over in the 1950s. And our involvement started here because the British authorities have environmental teams, archaeology teams, and they go to considerable lengths to try to look after the environment here. You can go on bird watching holidays to Akrotiri, that's not surprising, with the flamingos and so forth. One of the things they became concerned about was some known buildings on the south coast at this point down here. This was the very southernmost point of Cyprus, were washing into the sea. You can see these ancient walls here. And as custodians of the heritage on behalf of the Republic of Cyprus, who actually still own all the cultural heritage, all the archaeology, they wanted to make sure that this stuff was at least recorded, even if it couldn't be protected from the sea. So that was the kind of the beginning of our involvement in this. Give you a bit of an idea of what the archaeology is like there, by comparison with fields perhaps in Leicestershire, where you find some pot. Here you've got some field in among the pot, so to speak. You can actually see this is sort of terracotta flower pot ware here. If you look over there, it actually colours the ground. There is so much of it, there's more pot than earth. And what we have here, well, also walls you can see here exposed. What we actually have here mostly are late Roman wine jars, amphorae of the 5th, 6th, maybe early 7th century. Get a bit of an idea of the size of these here. So this was the archaeology, which was in danger of being washed into the sea, which we were asked to come and help the Ministry of Defence and the Department of Antiquities of the Republic of Cyprus to at least document and to investigate. And the reason that I particularly was involved in this, because this came very much through me and then involved more members of the department at Leicester, was I was already working with Operation Nightingale, which is a scheme to help injured British military serving personnel recover from their injuries through involving them in archaeology. This was something that's been very rewarding to be involved with. And normally we were doing this in freezing cold South Wales on a military base there. And I'd often thought, haven't we got a base in Cyprus? But can't we do this in the sun? And by good luck and by contacts through the Ministry of Defence, this came to pass. So we were invited to come and do this work in Cyprus. But this was not by any means going into a vacuum. That people had been working in this area for a very long time. In fact, the British Armed Forces had a very good record here, looking after the archaeological sites, and a number of serving and former military personnel actually explored a lot of the archaeology of Akrotiri, not least my friend Frank Garrod here, who's chair of the local archaeological society there, Brian Richards, who actually discovered the first underwater archaeology there as a young serviceman and came back to dig with us last year, which is wonderful. And also Frank Haggerty, who you see here, who I'll mention a bit more in a minute, because he made some important discoveries actually at our site at Dreamers Bay. And also some professional archaeologists had started to work here about 20 years ago, particularly led by Danielle Parks, who'd been working at a nearby site and became interested in what was going on here. And she was going to be working with the American archaeologists, including Brad Alt, and a Cypriot colleague, Stella Domestica, on a project at Dreamers Bay. But tragically, Danielle Parks died young, and they couldn't get funding, so that all fell apart. And really, our project then was the next opportunity to do something here. So in fact, the archaeology in this area has been explored particularly by amateur military archaeologists since about the 1970s, and they were the first people to identify the buildings we saw just now. Here's one of them, again, the pottery scatter. But Frank Haggerty in the bay just next to this area made a spectacular discovery in the 1980s when he was serving with a helicopter squadron, and a huge underwater masonry breakwaters. It was, of course, above the surface originally, but it's now sunk. This was a big surprise. It suggests there's actually an artificial harbour at this point as well, which was not suspected previously. There is some ancient literary reference to this area. We're fairly sure that what we now call Akrotiri, which simply means a promontory, was known as Kurias in antiquity. And the geographer Strabo was writing just about 2,000 years ago, mentions Kurias, which is peninsula-like. And then as you go along the coast to a city, Kyrion, which has a mooring place. There's somewhere else called Kyrion nearby, which you know about. These references, to say I'm not showing them all, but so these are the main ones, describe Kurias as a topographical feature, but also one or two others refer to it as though it might also be kind of a destination, a place, maybe a port town or something like that alongside Kyrion. So here is, again, going back to the context of Akrotiri. Here's Dreamers Bay. Now that's the Dreamers Bay itself, is that area there. We also use it for the land, adjacent land settlement stuff there. This is, we think, was called Kurias then, and nearby here is Kyrion, the ancient city, which we'll see again in just a second. This is about 13 kilometers up here, so it's fairly nearby. It will be 2 or 3 hours walk away. And here is Kyrion, and Kyrion is one of those sort of classical Mediterranean ruined classical cities. It's a Greek city which goes on right through the Roman period into the Byzantine era, and was one of the fairly important towns of Cyprus. In Greek and Roman times through to early Byzantine times, these are the major settlements on Cyprus. What's striking about this is only one of the cities, Tamassos, is actually inland. They're all coastal. Sea communications were critical for the communities on Cyprus, and we'll have more to say about this as we go. So this was the main area where we came to start our work then, and the remains that were already known look something like this. So the warehouses are on this piece of coastland here. The important thing to note is the whole of the southern cliffs, coast of Cyprus is cliffs or very steep slopes, except for this one area just here. And this is where the warehouses are, just right down on the relatively low shore. It's only sort of 2 or 3 meters above sea level here. And the people, the earlier surveyors of this site had inferred a substantial settlement behind this. There's certainly a cemetery there, which we surveyed, more tombs over here. We think the land may have extended out there in antiquities as an eroding coast. There's where the breakwater is, implying a harbour there, which we also know is indeed there because there are anchors and things inside it, ancient ones. Stone quarries up on here, which are a very important feature of this landscape. And this structure up here to a hilltop structure, which seems to be broadly contemporary with the rest of what we're looking at here. So the way others had written about this before we started was to see this as an important focus on Akrotiri, even as a port town, even as possibly the second most important settlement within the territory of the city-state of Kyrion. So this looked like it was going to be an important place to study. It's kind of a centralized and structured bit of landscape with a big settlement. So after a couple of false starts, we managed to get out there in 2015, and I was very lucky to be able to persuade several colleagues from University of Leicester Archaeological Services to come and lend their expertise for this pilot reconnaissance to look at the promise of the archaeology on the site. And I was absolutely delighted when I went to talk to Vicky Score and say, Vicky, do you know anybody who might be interested in actually being the field director to run this for me as project director? And she said, well, I've never done a project in the Mediterranean. I'd like to do it. I'm absolutely delighted by that. So I think many of you know Vicky. She's spoken to the group herself before. So she's been field director up to now, and of course has done a brilliant job. So 2015, we demonstrated that there was actually pretty good archaeology there. It was very promising and definitely worth investigating before it went into the sea. We went back in 2016 this time with an Operation Nightingale team with some injured service personnel, as we intended this to be a Nightingale exercise all the way along, to work with students and ULAS staff and so on. And that worked reasonably well. But one thing perhaps we should have realised is that, of course, a lot of injured service personnel suffer from PTSD. And unfortunately, just up on the ridge up there where it says 2016 is the rifle range. And we're at the business end of the rifle range, so we're hearing the sonic cracks of bullets going by, fast jets, helicopters. This was not good. If we tried to find a place with more PTSD triggers, we'd have been hard pressed. So we had to, I'm afraid, stop the Operation Nightingale involvement, which was a big disappointment to us all. However, there was still a job to be done here at Dreamers Bay for Ministry of Defence and Department of Antiquities, and also I had hoped there would be the opportunity to use this as an almost literal beachhead for a larger scale research project to look at the peninsula as a whole, because it seemed to me we weren't going to understand these remains down on the shoreline here, these so-called warehouses, without actually also looking at the peninsula as a whole, because it was known to be rich in other archaeology. So that's why this isn't the ancient Dreamers Bay project. This is the ancient Akrotiri project, and the Cyprus is there because there's another actually more famous, archaeologically more famous Akrotiri in Greece. You want to get the two confused. So that was the idea. We went for a 5-year project, and the other thing, of course, as you'd appreciate, we're here dealing with an ancient port. Now, I personally have never done maritime archaeology. Of course, we're in landlocked Leicester. We don't really do soggy archaeology. So in any case, I wanted this to be a collaborative project, preferably with Cypriot colleagues. But in the first instance, I went to the underwater archaeologists I knew, my friends at the University of Southampton, and got Lucy Blue involved. She'd also done her PhD on the coastlands and harbours in this area. She'd been to Dreamers Bay before, so that was brilliant. We later got our colleague Stella Domestica, who worked at the site, to come on board as our pottery specialist. And the other thing I rapidly learned, there's so much in this project that I've never understood before, we needed geomorphologists involved because this is seismically very active. The land goes up and down. We want to know what the ancient sea level was like to understand the port. So first of all, we got University of Southampton geomorphologist Feriol Salomon involved, and then he went off and got another job. And we were then very lucky to get my colleague Miltiadis Polidourou involved. He's just got his PhD from the University of Athens, so he's now our geomorphologist and is helping us to understand how the sea and the land worked in ancient times. So to show you what we've actually been discovering, we'll start off with the hilltop structure up above the back of the bay here. So this land rises up here to this crest, and this proved to be a rather elaborate series of buildings which had actually been found by British troops digging foxholes in the 1980s. I came across this corner here where we got a masonry building, really quite well built. It's got plaster, it's got gypsum floor slabs which are intended to be sort of poor man's marble, so it looked really quite smart. And it's on an absolutely dominating position. There's Cape Zevgari at the corner of the peninsula. The view you've got from the site here is spectacular, all the way around from the city of Kyrion there, along the coast there towards Paphos, right the way over Cape Zevgari, all the way around here to Cape Gata, almost to the east. Any ship which was approaching Akrotiri, to round Akrotiri, would have been visible from that point. So it's evidently an important lookout point. And the other thing we discovered as we excavated it is you've got this bizarre thing which we nicknamed the pizza oven, a bit over 1 metre across, as you can see here. Nobody that I've spoken to yet has seen anything quite like this. My own suspicion is that this was both a lookout point but also a landmark. It would have been a big, probably white building right on the crest of the hill that any ship would have seen coming in. It'd be a useful landmark if you're trying to find the anchorage here. But I wonder actually whether this is a beacon platform or whether this is also a lighthouse at night. I think that's a distinct possibility. So again, a landmark for ships approaching Cyprus or approaching this headland. One of the very last finds we made in 2019, which absolutely delighted me, was this little bronze object, copper alloy object, because I immediately recognized this as a roughly 6th century Byzantine military belt plate, which is wonderful because here we are digging an RAF airbase. I was just thinking, if only we could find something military to help make us more obviously relevant to the airbase. And indeed we did. This suggests that there was indeed, at least in the Byzantine period, a military presence at this site too, watching over the naval traffic, maritime traffic, which is rather good. So the dating we're getting from this hilltop structure again looks very late antique, rather like the pottery scatters we saw earlier on. It's looking like it's sort of 4th, 5th, 6th century, maybe into the early 7th century. So we're in the late antiquity, at the early Byzantine period here. The first thing we went to study, of course, were the shoreline warehouses down here. So we'll go and look at those next. And these are really fascinating because they're on an impressive scale. This is ½ kilometre of shoreline here. And one of the things that we were particularly surprised to realise is you can see how ragged the coastline is. It goes all over the place. These buildings all share pretty much the same alignment. It suggests that there's a sort of series of related courtyard enclosures and so forth here. It looks like quite an organised system. And we've dug parts of several of these, just sampled them because we haven't got the resources to dig them all. And they do indeed look like warehouses. That's what they've been thought to be on the surface. And we've duly found inside them amphorae, like that one, incidentally, I think is a Gazan amphora from southern Palestine, which we'll come back to later on. So that kind of fitted with our expectations. So we got a harbour here, we got warehousing, but and some other finds too, which fitted with the idea that this is a place of trade and exchange. So we found this lovely little, it's very small little copper alloy weight here, still with a nail adhering to it. And again, puts us into the late Roman period. It's got a Cairo Christian symbol on it, which is a lovely touch. But there are other things too, which have other functions here, like copper alloy nails, which are probably actually to do with boats. It looks as though there's a certain amount of ship maintenance going on here, repair work, and this item here has got a double eye at the top here, so it's quite big. It's about yay big, 6 inches, 7 inches, sort of 15, 18 centimeters, something like that. I think it's probably a sailmaker's needle, again hinting at ships undergoing maintenance and repair at this point. So it's not only to do with trade and exchange, what's going on here on the seafront. And the other interesting phenomenon in this particular warehouse was we found a number of used cooking pots. These weren't cargo, they've been used. People are actually cooking and consuming food here, but that was particularly curious because there's otherwise no domestic debris here at all. This is quite striking because it's a contrast with other settlement sites that you might look at in this area. And what it looks as though is that people are working here, they're having their lunch. Nobody's actually living in and around these buildings, which you might say is not a surprise with warehouses, but that's a point to bear in mind later on. The other thing which did surprise us, or particularly surprised Stella Domestica, who looked at the pottery for us, and she's a great expert on this, we assumed these warehouses were all going to be, again, 5th, 6th, 7th century, very late antique. In fact, she said, the pottery you got here is all actually before late Roman 1 amphora comes in, before the 5th century. Some of it's 3rd century, whereas we've got 3rd century coins and things. And the pot we got actually is very much the same as is found in the earthquake house at Kyrion, which was excavated some years ago. Kyrion suffered a devastating earthquake in about probably the 360s, which flattened the classical city, and then the Byzantine Christian city is built on top of it. And it looks as though our warehouses were destroyed around the same time, sealing this no later than about 360, maybe 370 at the latest, pottery and coins inside it. Looks like an earthquake tipped all the walls over, perhaps something rather like that. That was a big surprise because what we realized was that everything inside the warehouses was much earlier than all those pottery scatters on the surface over the top. So there seems to have been warehouses here probably for at least 100, maybe even 200 years. They're destroyed in an earthquake, they're not rebuilt, but nonetheless this shoreline is still being used for trading activities for at least another 200 or 300 years. We suddenly doubled the time depth of our port here, which was a very interesting development, putting it back into the main classical period. The other area which we investigated, which hadn't been looked at much, were the stone quarries up immediately above the harbour on this side of the site. And here's one of the quarries, the visually most comprehensible one, where you can immediately see they're creating all sorts of different things. We've got these round cutouts here where they're making millstones from this marine conglomerate, different gradations of the conglomerate, which has smaller inclusions in it. They're cutting square blocks for building, and elsewhere they're grinding it into loose aggregate to make concrete and mortars, which we actually see in Kyrion. You can see the dark conglomerate inclusions which come from this quarry there. This is an important local mineral exploitation site immediately above the harbour. So there's the extent of it marked out in red. It runs for several hundred meters. They're taking out thousands of tons of stone, and down the face of the very steep slope, it's cliffs on either side. Here is a slope. Thousands of tons of this red topsoil, which overlay the deposits they were after, this lovely conglomerate, was carefully piled down here and made into a ramp to allow access down to the harbour, so they could actually lower blocks down on the soft earth rather than batter them down the stone surface. So there's this huge spoil dump come ramp here to allow them to get the cargo out to the ships out in the bay. So we've got trading activity over on the west side where the warehouses are, amphorae and things going in and out of Akrotiri, and here we've got industrial production coming down into the harbour. Now we're still trying to understand the chronology of this. Because of COVID, we got various scientific dates stuck in laboratories in various places in Europe, but we did get some stratigraphy in the last season. We realised there's a massive building complex over here, which has got Roman-style plaster walls with some fragments of graffiti on fallen plaster, which is quite fun. Not been able to read those yet, but also a hydraulic system, pipe water supply. This looks like it's quite a posh residence here, and it's actually built over some of the quarrying. To cut a long story sideways, we think what's going on here is we may have Hellenistic quarrying, last century BC, before the Roman period, Roman era quarrying, perhaps a middle to late Roman building here. There may be late Roman quarrying as well. So this is another very important part of the story, what's going on here at Dreamers Bay. Okay, where are we here? Yeah, so that's interesting. I thought I'd hidden these slides. I've now discovered that, this function doesn't hide a couple of slides. Never mind. Okay, so the next thing, by seeing this segue, we now slid down the ramp, so to speak, into the harbour. This is where I'll talk briefly about the underwater archaeology, which is actually, again, still kind of pending. Our colleagues from the University of Southampton, Lucy Blue, she led an international team, including Cypriot divers, as well as people from all over the place, from the US as well, on 2 seasons in 2018 and 2019. She's still writing up her preliminary report at the moment, so I can only give you 1 or 2 sort of headlines of what they found in between the breakwater and the foot of the quarry ramps. And unsurprisingly, in the harbour, they found fragments of amphory. Here you see some divers working on the submerged breakwater. I love this photograph that they took. There you can see the blocks of the breakwater just under the surface. If you stand on the breakwater, you come up through the surface of the water, actually make it very hard to survey. So that's one of the important targets we've got, is to do an accurate survey of that, and also try to date it to understand when was it created. Again, the dating samples we've got are currently still pending, but their survey of the inner part of the harbour, which had been looked at before, but now we're using much more sophisticated equipment, produced some surprises. There were things we did expect, like ancient anchors, but also lots of ceramic. But they also identified a couple of columns, and these are actually Aswan granite columns from Egypt, red granite columns, which itself is a really interesting detail. And it may well be that there is at least one late antique shipwreck here, but we're not entirely sure about that. We hope to go back maybe in 2021 to complete the story. Just while I'm talking about the University of Southampton contribution, reminds me about the geomorphology. I mentioned the importance of understanding where ancient sea level was, so you get a bit of an idea of how that breakwater worked, among other things. It turns out the way to find this out is to go to the other side of the peninsula and do great big cores into the Salt Lake area, which again, these cores are being worked on at the moment, but one of the spin-offs of the project has been to now get a date for when the island became connected with the mainland of Cyprus through the building up of these great beaches, the creation of the Salt Lake. There was some question about whether it might even actually have not happened until the Greek period, or perhaps even later still, but we now establish that this had actually already happened many thousands of years ago. So this always was a peninsula right the way through the period we're discussing here. So that's the harbour. The other, of course, central element of all of this complex, as was thought to be, is the settlement. What is actually going on there? Now this is something, of course, we wanted to have a good look at. It's not under immediate archaeological threat, but it's a key part of the story to understand what's going on, not least with the warehouses. The assumption was, if you've got these warehouses along the shoreline, or they've got a cemetery, a harbour over here, there's bound to be a settlement behind it. So this is a little port town. So we thought we'd go looking for this, because I was rather doubtful about this. We walked over this area a lot, and there wasn't much sign of anything on the surface, which made me rather suspicious, because that's untypical for settlement sites at Akrotiri, as we'll see in a minute. So we couldn't see anything on the surface. We dug a few machine trenches, we didn't turn up anything. And then we went back and did a geophysical survey, partly again to try to work out how extensive the warehouses really were, the ones we couldn't see exposed in the surface. And we extended the geophysics back inland behind the warehouses. Incidentally, this is what Akrotiri looks like in January. It isn't always lovely sunshine. It can get a bit bracing with 40-knot winds. And here's the results of the geophysics. So with the actual, all these complexes of warehouses picked out in blue, so you did some quite large areas back into the area, which is supposed to be the heart of this settlement, and there is nothing. All we could see was geology and also the modern trackways showing up in the magnetometry. So putting all this together, surface observation, geophysics, some trenching, there is no settlement there. So it was rather careless of us to lose a settlement. Now the point is, if there's no settlement there, then out of the window goes the idea of Dreamers Bay as being a port town of any kind. Nobody's living here. What we instead have is a group of coastal activities and facilities, including the burial of the dead. In fact, there's more dead there, I showed earlier on. There's also further cemeteries over in this direction outside our immediate remit. What we have here is a group of coastal activities and facilities. People are clearly coming here to work. They're doing it over a period of centuries. They're shifting thousands of tons of stuff. Who knows how many hundreds of ships they're dealing with. And of course, also there's these facilities up here. Where actually then were the people living? And in fact, actually, in a way, I was not at all surprised that there was not a settlement down there, because we already knew that there were other important settlements really quite close by, right actually in the middle of the Royal Air Force Air Base. And you'll notice, incidentally, how the military town is built around these two areas of scrubland, which were known to be, because from the surface indications, known to be ancient settlements, even when the air base was built. One of the remarkable things about RAF Akrotiri is the first thing they did when they took over the territory was to have an archaeological survey, mark out the sites, schedule them, and then do all the development work around it. And how amazing was that for the 1950s, not least in the Mediterranean world? That was really very commendable. So these areas are rough ground today in the middle of the airbase because they're these settlement sites, and in fact they're like little tells. Well, they're quite sizable. You can see they're several hundred meters across. These are a good few hectares, and they actually stand in places up to 6, 8, even 10 meters tall, like little tells. Many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with the idea of these elevated sites you get in the Middle East, where you build houses on top of houses on top of houses, so the settlement rises out of the surrounding land. That's really what's happened here. There are clearly settlements here for some centuries. We haven't dug those yet. This is what I got my eye on for the future, but the surface indications, again, they look on the surface to be late antique, and I would bet a fair amount of money that there are Roman and maybe even Hellenistic Greek layers, even classical Greek perhaps, right at the bottom of these settlement mounds. So this seems to be probably a couple of the places maybe where the people working this sort of industrial landscape down here, where they actually lived, where they actually slept. But these aren't the only villages on the peninsula, because Akrotiri actually has several ancient settlement sites like this. So they're the two we just looked at right in the middle of the peninsula. And there are two others. There's a very large one over here, Katalimiton Plakaton, which also has a colossal Byzantine church complex, which our colleague Eleni Prokopiou from the Department of Antiquities has been digging. That's actually outside the airbase fence. And there's another village here, Shiliastasia, at the eastern end. Another little settlement there apparently too. There's at least 4 village-sized sites on the peninsula, which is really interesting. So how do these then relate to the harbour facilities here? Was this simply the port for the scattered villages of the peninsula? Well, I already hinted at this earlier on. I think we need to zoom out further and look at the wider settlement context of Akrotiri, Dreamers Bay itself here. Already mentioned Kyrion is nearby. And remember the other coastal cities of Cyprus. The way Cyprus worked and was held together, the way the cities, the main nodes of settlement and the government and so forth communicated with each other was often as much as possible by sea, especially if you want to move goods. Obviously you can ride across over the land here, but this is not easy country, as any of you who've been to Cyprus will know. It never has been up until the motorway was driven through here since Cyprus joined the EU. Now it's very quick. So you needed to go by sea between the various cities, but there's a substantial practical problem created by the peninsula here, by the Akrotiri Peninsula. As you can see, it sticks a long way out into the sea here. Here are the 3 important cities of the region. Kyrion we talked about, and Paphos to the west, Amathus to the east. Both of these are larger, more important than Kyrion. The prevailing wind most of the year, except for a couple of months really in the winter time, is westerly to southwesterly, like this. I remember, of course, in antiquity we're dealing with sailing ships. Now, if you want to be moving cargoes around the coast of Cyprus, you can indeed sail happily from Paphos to Kyrion. But once you're at Kyrion, you're actually embayed. Now, it's actually, having spoken to people who understand sailing ships in the way that I don't, it's not too difficult in practice, especially often first thing in the morning before the westerlies get going. There'll be winds coming down off the Troodos Mountains, which can get you out and around the headland. But it's a bit of a pain. And if you are perhaps in a larger ship or one that's not terribly maybe seaworthy, you probably don't want to venture into Kyrion Bay if you want to go on to other places, unless you have to. This might be one of the reasons that a port was established on the south side of the Akrotiri Peninsula, because you can easily sail there, you can offload your stuff, and it can then go by donkey to Kyrion, or maybe even in small boats when the wind's favourable, just around there. And it's then very easy. You haven't got to weather this headland. You can just sail out of here, get around to Amathus, and go on your merry way. That's one good reason for having an anchorage there, making that perhaps a secondary satellite port for Kyrion. There are, of course, other cases of ancient cities which have satellite ports, like Rome has Ostia down on the coast, and Athens has the Piraeus, and so on. Not immediately comparable, but it's a similar idea, the idea of a satellite port. But we have also some other clues, which means we have to draw a sort of focus. We'll zoom out even further, because we have, I mentioned earlier on, one of the amphorae I showed you under excavation was from Gaza in southern Palestine. And in the bottom of the harbour, we've also found that Egyptian granite column. There's local stone being shipped out of the harbour here, which might just be going to other places in Cyprus, maybe just going around to Kyrion, to Amathus, we don't know. But there's also stone coming from a long way away, coming to this place, and possibly not intended to be delivered here. There certainly were some important buildings, like the great church complex I mentioned at the village of Kassilimaton Plakaton on the peninsula. But I think a lot of this stuff was actually in transshipment, and that ended up in the harbour. Maybe, if we're right, that we have got a shipwreck, perhaps a result of a storm, or maybe even a tsunami in our harbour that deposited those great columns. Well, not, I exaggerate, they're quite small columns actually, but the point is they're Egyptian granite. And there are big stacks of other building materials and things in there as well, in the bottom of the harbour. And this brings us to this map, which was drawn up by a French colleague who's an expert sailor, and also study what do we know about ancient sea routes in this part of the Mediterranean from the text and the documents, which ports were linked with which other ports and anchorages, and just landfalls. And one of the things you note, here we are at Kyrios, Akrotiri, just look at how many blue water sailing routes, apart from the coastal tramp steamers, so to speak, how many of these converge on Akrotiri or depart from Akrotiri. This was actually one of the most important maritime crossroads in the Eastern Mediterranean. This point at Dreamers Bay, that headland, that's where ships went off, rather than following the coast, they set off over the horizon on maybe 2-3 day journeys to places like Gaza and Ascalon, Caesarea and so forth. They were also going to and from the port at Pelusium in Egypt. So that's probably how the Aswan columns came here. And also, so they might be going from places like that. One place we do know, one route we do know was taken is from Egypt with things like granite, all the way up to Seleucia, to, it's not actually shown on this map, but the great city of Antioch, one of the greatest cities of the ancient world, just here, as big as important as Alexandria. That had a huge mile-long street which was paved with Egyptian granite. How did the Egyptian granite get there? A lot of it is very likely to have followed this route to make landfall at Akrotiri and then follow the coastal route. You can possibly go that way as well, but this is probably a quicker route, maybe better on the winds, and also it's possibly rather more certain with the winds as well. So this leads us to another possible explanation for what's going on why there are these maritime facilities here. So as well as it being for low export of local goods from the stone quarry, as well as it being for import and export of things like, you know, wines. We know there's wines and olive oils coming in from places like what is today Turkey, for instance, and also, as I said, from Gaza, as well as stuff being imported here and maybe exported from the peninsula. This is also not even a transshipment point. It's a motorway services in the Eastern Mediterranean for shipping going between the Aegean from Greece in the west and ultimately maybe from the Black Sea, heading down towards Palestine, from Egypt to Syria and back maybe in the opposite direction. Most of that shipping is likely to have made landfall here. And a lot of the ships will either be arriving from or about to depart on these blue water journeys. And ancient ships, generally speaking, did not stay at sea for great lengths of time, like even 18th century sailing ships did. They needed to put ashore for crews to sleep, to replenish water, for food, and to, of course, wooden ships need a lot of repair. So what I have suggested is that a substantial function of Dreamers Bay, which helps to fit in with things like the sailmaker's needle and the ship's nails and so forth, is this is a pit stop. This is where shipping going to and from distant places, they pause here, perhaps only briefly, maybe they do a little bit of trading, but they're mainly in transit elsewhere. They stop here to let their crews have a leg stretch, run ashore, maybe go off to use the facilities, these services in the villages up here. You can imagine what those services and facilities might have been like. Some of them would have included things like temples, you know, making vows and prayers for the next stage of your journey. So I hope you won't drown. But also to do some running repairs, replenish, stock up on food, and then go on their way. This is where I think that there's a lovely parallel here, which I love to strike with the RAF, between one important function of Dreamers Bay, as I see it, and the modern RAF Akrotiri. Akrotiri is a centre of communications. It's not generally a destination, it's somewhere you pass through. You stop there, maybe spend a night or two, the aircraft refuel, and for example, even now, British service personnel in Afghanistan or Iraq, they'll fly here and then they'll fly on to the UK rather than going through in one go. So that's a rather lovely parallel between the two. But it does suggest that this little port, these port facilities here, might have been really quite significant in the communications of the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine world. But there's also a further problem with this, which is that actually this is a rather lousy harbour. And it'd be very interesting, a great education for me, getting a number of very eminent marine archaeologists to come and look at this site and to discuss it with me so I can draw on their expertise. And they look around and say, why is there a harbour here? This is terrible, because it's largely exposed, especially to southwesterly winds, which might help people where there are shipwrecks in the bay there. It's really quite exposed. It's not a sensible place. There is a possibility that we are looking only at a part of the picture. Remember I said how important I thought it was that we should look at the whole of the peninsula as an entity. And talking to my maritime colleagues, we've wondered about whether there could be other harbour facilities. One area we're looking at is on the east coast here, where there are hints of other buildings which might conceivably be a second complex like Dreamers Bay. That's what we were hoping to be doing at Easter, but of course this got COVID bashed, so we'll have to wait to investigate this. What we do think is possible is that in fact there were multiple anchorages around the peninsula which were used for different purposes at different times of year. This side is sheltered for most of the year and has quite nice sandy beaches here. In fact, in many ways that makes a better idea, a better site for a port, but clearly they did put a lot of effort here and it was used for centuries. So we got probably at least two anchorages here. I'm wondering actually whether there's an open roadstead on, off the front of the warehouses here. That's something we're going to look at with marine geophysics. We hope to see if we can spot anchors and things on the seafloor. And there's even hints that another one of our American colleagues has identified of when the weather conditions are okay, people may even have been putting in on the shore here. Sometimes the winds blow easterly and then it would be safer to go into these little caves, coves there without getting shipwrecked. So this starts to give us a very different picture from what we started with, which was of the idea of there being a little port town down here. We lost that. What we got here are port facilities here, maybe others elsewhere, and a number of settlements which seem to relate to the potential anchorages. So I think we have a kind of an answer to the question of, is Kurias just a topographical thing, just this headland, or is it actually a place, a destination? I think it can be a place, a destination, a human landscape as well. We can think of this as being, if you think of what we normally get concentrated in a port, where you have, there is the harbour, there is the settlements, there'll be cemeteries and things as well, whatever else around there, concentrated in one place, as happens at places like Amathus, which is off in that direction across the bay. Here you've got those same things kind of smeared out across this block of landscape. We can think of this as an integrated maritime cultural landscape. And I think one of the key reasons they couldn't have a single central town was that it's got very little water supply. People tend to disperse here. You'll notice they're tending to be where the catchment areas are for the rain runoff, which is all you've got here. So they probably couldn't focus in a town. They had to be in dispersed villages. So you've got kind of a dispersed port quasi-town, or a group of villages and a group of maritime facilities. So that's kind of the story we think we've got from the fieldwork so far. It's vindicated the idea that we need to look at the landscape as a whole, but it's also done a lot of other things as well. It's been a training exercise, not least for our own students. I always think this looks like a post photo. It isn't actually. That's Vicky really teaching, and Andy Hyam really teaching a couple of our undergraduates surveying skills. So they've learned not only archaeological field skills, but also other very important skills too. Outreach, particularly those of you in the fieldwork group will be aware of the importance that we in University of Leicester place on working with communities, on telling people what we're doing, and as far as possible involving them in what we're doing as well when we do fieldwork, and helping others with their projects. This is something we're also training our students in. Here we have students from the local base secondary school coming to see what's going on. So schools programs, open days as well for the military community. There are various problems with insurance which make it difficult for us just to have members of the base community participating, but at least we can give them an open day, show them what we're doing, let them handle the pottery and so forth. That's been very important too, and of course there's been some amenity for the service families as well. The biggest thing, a particular focus, is on the Cypriot community, because we are of course working on their heritage in their land within an area which is largely sequestered from them. Most Cypriots cannot get inside Royal Air Force Akrotiri Air Base. It's a high security air base. But what we've been able to do is to arrange for bringing in a coach load of the villagers to come into the air base to see this heritage, which many of them have never seen before, and to talk to them about it. And this has been very important, and the British authorities have been very keen on this because it all helps with intercommunal relations. It's helping us with our ethical responsibilities to work with the local community with regard to the heritage. And also we ourselves are learning an enormous amount from our Cypriot colleagues. And we've got an important Cypriot element in the team. For example, these women here are both master students from University of Cyprus, who actually not only as interpreters, they're also fully part of the project. So they were digging up the archaeology too. And in fact, she herself is from Akrotiri village, which was particularly wonderful. So that's been extremely important to us. But that, of course, is something that's only very short term. We could only do that as a one-off. We can't do that all the time. It took weeks to arrange that on security passes. It was a nightmare. But what we can do is a longer term engagement with the Cypriot community. Outside the airbase is the Akrotiri Environmental Education Centre, which is largely about the natural environment, about the birds and the wildlife, but they also have a remit for dealing with the cultural heritage. And my colleague Maria Gonzalez Rodriguez is very important in this. We are developing with them alongside their ecology classes for school groups and so forth, both English speaking, especially Cypriots, to have, as well as ecology classes, have archaeology sessions as well. They can hopefully see some of the sites and certainly handle archaeological material. I'm going to skip over that because we're out of time here. I want to talk about the where we're going next with this. We want to have Akrotiri Phase 2 as soon as COVID is over. The British authorities are still very keen we should work on this. The Cypriot community have also greatly engaged in it. We want to do more exploration of the seabed to complete the story of Dreamers Bay. I'm very keen to look at the archaeology of the settlements to complete the story of the land side, to see where people were living as well as where they're working. There are hundreds of tombs. We'd like to map the cemeteries. Environmental archaeology too, but particularly we want to do this through community archaeology. Well, I'm very much hoping we'll be able to do a couple of excavations, one inside the airbase where we actually involve RAF service personnel and families, and one outside the airbase where we can, without security restrictions, involve the Akrotiri village community in digging up their own heritage with us so we can explore it together. That's what we want to do next. So just in closing, just also of course like to emphasize that we couldn't do this without the generous support of both the British military authorities, Sovereign Base Areas Administration, not least, and especially the generous support of the Republic of Cyprus Department of Antiquities, who've been extremely kind and supportive. Fantastic to work with them. And also, here are two gods of Akrotiri. These are the two of the 4 station commanders we worked with so far. If the station commander didn't want us on his manor, this wouldn't happen. So we're deeply grateful to the Royal Air Force for allowing us to go and work in this high security air base. They value what we're doing as being a beneficial both to the RAF and also to intercommunal relations. And finally, I must gratefully acknowledge the Honor Frost Foundation, who've been bankrolling us for the last few years, specialist foundation for maritime archaeology in the Eastern Med. They've made everything you've seen possible here, as have all of these other groups too. Many will be aware that all these archaeological projects are collaborative exercises. This one has involved more different groups than I've ever known, and sometimes been incredibly complex, or it's always been complex. Sometimes it's been a nightmare. Most of the time it's been an absolute joy, and it's been a privilege to share it with you this evening. So thank you very much.
Right, thank you very much, Simon. You happy to take some questions?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm not sure how we're going to do this, Matt. Is that through the chat box?
Yeah, there's quite a few already in the chat box, and if anyone else wants to type one in, they're welcome. If you want to read them out, Pete, then Simon can answer them.
Right, let's have a look. Right, there's one that says, have you considered, this is Catherine Kruger, have you considered consulting the Institute of Nautical Archaeology for collaboration with more nautical archaeologists?
Well, my collaborators are, Stella Domestica is the leading Cypriot maritime archaeologist. She is Mrs. Underwater Archaeology in Cyprus. And Lucy Blue also is a leading British one. So it'd be very much a case of I follow their recommendations and advice on this. That's their half of the project. I wouldn't presume. But one thing in connection with the Institute of Nautical Archaeology, that we had a gathering of in Nicosia in 2016, I think it was, for the centenary of the birth, I think, of Honor Frost herself, who was a pioneering maritime archaeologist in Nicosia, where I got to talk to 300 maritime archaeologists. It was wonderful. And it was great because me as a complete outsider, there was such a welcoming community. So I think all of the interested maritime archaeologists, they're already in the frame. We've already spoken to them. They know about this. And so anyway, I think if we needed anybody else on board, then Lucy and particularly Stella would advise me on that.
Right, thank you, Simon. Being asked if there's any opportunity for people to volunteer to dig with you.
Well, as you can
it
imagine,
does look exciting.
It's quite popular. I tried to, when we started doing Up Nightingale, I tried to interest colleagues and students in going to dig with the British troops in South Wales in the freezing cold. There weren't many takers, but when I said Cyprus, it started coming out the woodwork, curiously. The problem is that we are in a high security airbase. And that is the part of the nightmare, is security clearances, passes, escort rights, because nobody's allowed to go anywhere without somebody with special escort rights. So we actually have to take the smallest number of people from the UK we can get away with to do the job. And also, we don't want to have too many people there because we don't want to start outstaying our welcome. So there are strict limits on who we can take. So we tend to take a small core of ULAS colleagues to actually run the project. So this is the land side. And then a small number of UK students from our own department, and then a matching number from University of Cyprus, is the way it is. And we really can't get anybody else on, I'm afraid. That's the downside of this. It might change if we start working outside the wire, because there are no security restrictions there. So then it might be more of a possibility.
Right, thank you. I'm being asked if the map of shipping routes is available in a publication somewhere.
It is, and I have a terrible memory. It's gone out of my head. Actually, what did I do on here? I'm going to see. I'll see if I can look it up while we're talking. So I'll come back to that. Do you want to pass on to the next question, Peter? While I'm trying to remind myself about this.
Right. One suggestion is that you're not finding settlement because it might be underwater. Is that a possibility?
No, it's not. The warehouses quite clearly were always close to the shoreline. There can't be a settlement in front of them. It could only be behind. We now understand that it's actually sitting on an enormous landslip from some hundreds of thousands of years ago. So there really isn't anywhere for there to have been a settlement that is plausible. And as I say, in a way, it would be overkill because you're only 10 minutes walk from these very large villages, which is just up the hill.
Right.
So we see that we need them.
Right. What is the oldest dated activity on the peninsula?
Ah, that's a very good question. 13,000 years ago. Along the peninsula, I'm not going to try to go to another slide because this doesn't work like normal PowerPoint does. This is a special beta function in Zoom which allows me to do this background thing, but it doesn't work properly. As you see, I had a couple of glitches and things I wasn't expecting to see. Anyway, along the south coast of the peninsula, along the cliffs, about 1.5 kilometers to the east of where we're working, there is a site called Etakremnos, which has pygmy hippos and pygmy elephant bones with some tools. And that, as far as I know, stand to be corrected, is still the oldest known archaeological site anywhere on Cyprus, but I think about 13,000 years old. Otherwise, excuse me, the next oldest archaeological remains I'm aware of really are, I think, classical Greek period. There's, or maybe archaic. There is a sanctuary site, again, within the airbase, well, on the peninsula zone anyway, where there's the remains of terracotta figurines and things which look to be archaic. But most of the settlement activity we can see on the surface looks to be Roman and Byzantine, but so I'm pretty confident we're going to find Hellenistic stuff at the bottom of it.
Right.
That'll be sort of 3rd century, 2nd century BC.
Got a question as to how the site has been left. Is there anything visible for people to see, and where are the finds from the site now? The
finds all stay in Cyprus. They are at the Kyrion Museum, which is in Episcopi Village, which is not the same as Episcopi Garrison. That's where we actually live when we're in Cyprus. It's a lovely little museum. That's where we will be working on them, and they'll stay there. The site itself, one of the things we did, which I skipped over quickly because we were running out of time, is new site signage, because the warehouse structures, much of those are simply exposed. You can see them, and at least we've now stopped people driving 4x4s over them, which is what they were doing. So you can just go and see those. The quarries you can walk around, and again, there's now interpretive signage up there. That's one of the things we've been doing. So quite a lot of stuff you can see, and I haven't shown you a lot of the other wonderful remains on the peninsula, including tombs and so forth, which you can go into some of them. Of course, unfortunately, most of those are just not accessible to the public. They're only accessible to people who live and work in the base.
Right, thank you. I think that's probably most of the questions. We've had a lot of comments. I'm not sure if you're looking at the comments box. A lot of people saying what an excellent talk it was. I can only agree with them, and thank you very much, Simon, for taking us away from a dark, wet, cold November in Leicestershire to somewhere a lot sunnier and a lot warmer. So thank you very much.
My pleasure, Peter. Thank you very much for inviting me.